Okay, so last Sunday, I said that our class following Hebrews 11 with various examples of faith. And in those examples of faith, we were looking for our three elements of faith: belief, trust, and action. And then I finished up by saying, okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to move on into one more example of faith, and that's going to be Jesus. And while I was working on that class this week, the focus kind of changed. And so rather than spending a class right now talking about faith/faithfulness of Jesus as an example, I want to spend some time talking about faith and prayer. And maybe as we go through this class, it'll become apparent like how this happened. But I told Becky yesterday, the three lessons that I have today that I prepared, especially this one. This is the one I think I'm most looking forward to. I hope that there's some way for me to get out of my heart, out of my mouth, the way that I feel about this text. Because this is a text and some of the lessons that I was looking at and just learning and feeling this week that really moved me, and I always worry that I'm not going to be able to transfer that from out of my mouth to you. And so I hope that that works. But let's just look at this first of all. Would somebody read? I need a reader. And as you read, I think I'll just go ahead and tell you, obviously, this is a class on faith. What we're looking for is faith here. What are the lessons about faith that I can take away from this text? So Mark chapter 9 and verses 14 to 29. Who's going to read that for us? Mark 9, 14 to 29. Dave, go ahead.
When they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" Someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able." And he answered them, "O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me." And they brought the boy to him, and when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. And it has often cast him into fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." And Jesus said to him, "If you can, all things are possible for one who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe, help my unbelief." And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out. And the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" And he said to them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer."
Okay. Thanks, Dave. All right, so before I jump into some of the things that I was seeing and thinking, what are your initial thoughts just about this text generally? Doesn't even have to be about this class. What do you see whenever we read this text? What are you learning and seeing? Yeah, Maria?
It reminds me of the story in John 4, looking at my notes because I did a study, like just a self this, for Jesus to save his son because his son was dying. And at the moment that he believed, and Jesus basically tells him, you see, I do signs and wonders, but you don't believe. And then at the moment that he believed is when his son was actually saved. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, the faith is what God has always looked for from his people.
That's what he was looking for, and that his son was able to live. And
Yeah.
it's not that he didn't, he even tells him, because he was begging Jesus to come, like physically come to where his son was located. And it's like, I didn't even have to go that far,
Yeah.
just by you believing that I'm capable of saving your son.
Yeah, that faith.
That was, at that moment, he was saved.
Good. Anything else? Others? Jim?
For those of us who don't take time to pray, like myself, I think the last verse tells you.
Why is that? Yeah, like I don't know, just say more about it.
I think that last verse in 29 says the difficult things require prayer.
Yeah. So, does it feel out of place to you? It kind of feels out of place to me. You read this whole story, and we come to the end of the story, and the disciples come to Jesus, and they're like, what's this going on here? Like, why couldn't we do this? And Jesus' response in the Gospel of Mark is, this kind cannot driven out by anything but prayer. And it's almost like we're moving down the flow of the river and then it goes, "Urgh!" It almost feels like that to me, like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that, to happen. And so, yeah, we'll talk a lot. That's what this class is, faith and prayer. I'm glad that that's one of the things that you saw too, Jay.
I guess I was thinking of, at first I was thinking about how he had more to teach them. He had more to teach the disciples about what it is they were doing. It almost seems like, I don't know if you're going to get this, but it almost seems like they believed that they had the power, maybe didn't even need him anymore.
Ooh, that is exactly what I'm going to get to. Yeah, right. I like that a lot. I just have a whole list of, I don't know if I will subject you all to this, but there's a bunch of things that I read. And each of these sentences that I read it and I stopped and I was just like, man, like sometimes somebody says something that just nails you right in the heart. And there was a whole bunch of them right in a row. And it mostly focused on what you're talking about there. So yeah, we'll do that. Ryan.
I find it difficult to read verse 19 where it says, "Oh, faithless generation." Because when I read this, it seems like they're doing all the right things. They're taking them to the apostles, and then they take them to Jesus. Like in other places in the gospel, I think about, the friends carrying the paralytic man to Jesus. Like all of that was, because of your faith.
Yeah.
By bringing that person to me, or by taking them to the apostles, that is the faith.
Yeah.
But here it's this generation is faithless.
Which is one of the major indicators that the problem in this story is a faith problem. And I think that this is especially neat. This is what I'm surprised that nobody went straight to this, because this is my number one go-to whenever I read this story. I'm going to start in verse 21. Jesus said, how long has this been happening? The father said, from childhood. And then the second half of verse 22. If you need to highlight something in order to see emphasis in the story, then the words "if" are the things that you're going to want to see. This is what the dad says to Jesus. If you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus answers, if I can. You're going to come to Jesus, you're going to come to me and say, if I can do anything? And so we're learning this story about what it means to believe and to trust and to act. And this guy is learning, and he says, I do believe, but help my unbelief. Like there's this gap in what I have and what I need, and I'm asking you to help me fill in that gap. And This story is so much a part of my thinking on faith that I almost called the class "Help My Unbelief" because of this thing that we're looking at now. Okay, I think I saw one more. Let's do one more over here. Yeah, Ian?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, the guy who was on the ground foaming in his mouth, wasn't he having a seizure?
Well, I don't know if we would call it a seizure. I would call it he was possessed by a demon, and that demon was having a negative impact on him. Okay, so let's do a couple things here. This is this thing that I, just working through the text, some of the things that I like to start out with. Number one, what do we know? Because there's a lot of gaps here that I'm not sure about. So I always start with, what do I know about this story? What do I know about what's going on here? Number one, start in verse 2, chapter 9 and verse 2. There is the story of Jesus is transfigured with Peter and James and John. And in verse 14, at the start of our story, Jesus and Peter and James and John, who have just experienced the glory of God, come down from the mountain. In verse 14, it says, "And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them and scribes arguing with them." So that's going to be number one. The first thing that I think I would point to is that I think I would say it like this. There's something that doesn't belong in this story. And I think that I imagine I'm the disciples. There's this dad with this boy, and everybody's excited, right? Our heart rates are elevated. Our stress is elevated. They're trying to cast out this demon, and they can't, and they don't know why, and it has resorted to arguing with everyone. And you look at, I think you look throughout some of the rest of this text, chapter 9 and verse 33, this seems to be a theme throughout this whole chunk of text here. They came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you discussing on the way?" But they kept silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. And then there's another one in chapter 9 and verse 38. John said, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, so we tried to stop him because he was not following us." And Jesus is like, guys. And then you come to chapter 10 and verse 35. It's almost like by the time you get to 10:35, it's almost like you're saying, these people are never going to learn. It almost feels that way. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said, "What do you want me to do?" And they said, "We want to be the most important, one to sit at your right, one to sit at your left." And Jesus says, "You don't know what you're talking about." And then at the end of that section, the other disciples are indignant because they would have the nerve to ask to be ahead of them. And so, what do I know? Number one, in this situation where there's a dad who has a son who's possessed by a demon, and the disciples are not able to take care of this story is surrounded by bickering and arguing. Right? I mean, we're just putting the pieces together here. And I think that one thing, I read a couple things that really, I guess I don't have to read them to you. Some of you will have seen this because I wrote it on the internet last week. Do you think that dad cared even a little bit about their arguments in that moment? That dad wanted one thing. He needed help. And the very last thing on his list was the apostles arguing with the scribes, with the apostles arguing with each other about who was the greatest and all that stuff. That dad needed help. He didn't care anything at all about their, I would call them stupid arguments, like, put that stuff aside.
I was thinking about what Brian brought up, because I wrote 8:12, because he says it again, about unbelieving generation. And it says in chapter 8, well, 11 and 12, I guess, that the same thing, because Jesus just seems like really discouraged, he's just sighing deeply, it says, because they, they're just, I think these are people that are supposed to know covenant people, people that would understand the Old Testament. So I think that's right. And so it's just interesting because throughout the book, whenever some of us ladies had been studying this last year, I remember he kept saying stuff like, people who see and people who are not seeing, not hearing, they're not listening. And he keeps trying to warn them because he's dealing with such stubborn, hardened heart people. And Jesus, from the very beginning of his book, he just immediately does like so many miracles and cool things. The demons know who he is. This story you were just reading, it's just like super evil, scariness stuff. And it makes you kind of think of like the Israelites. God did such cool stuff for them, just like the coolest miracles, and they just constantly are hardened of heart.
Yeah.
And so this dad, it does seem like he cares, but there's like levels of faith, and he's just growing, so your faith is like
Yeah.
a process. But it's, what's standing out to me is that Jesus is just trying to warn them, but they're all just, so he's just getting discouraged with how they just don't get there. You haven't done something, you still don't
Yeah.
get there.
I thought the same thing with the Israelites. When you talk about the transfiguration, they come down off the mountain. I think about, we just saw the presence of God 40 days ago, and we heard his voice, and Moses is up there with him right now, and God says, you got to get down there, man. Those people are worshiping a cow. And it's the same thing where God is just like, I don't know how, I relate it back to kids, all the time, and it's like, can we stop this? Do you know what I'm saying? Like we have, and in church work especially, we have work to do. There's a lot of need present, things that need to happen, and somebody's gonna bicker about something stupid that doesn't even matter. And it's just like, number one thing that I know. I saw some hands. Let me push forward a little more because I want to keep going. We can keep talking, but I want to keep pushing forward. Number 2, a man asked the disciples to cast out a demon from his son, and they could not do it. Now, this is one thing that I want to, Jay, your comment especially, I think, deserves some attention. Look at those extra passages up there. Chapter 6 and verse 7. Jesus calls the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. So here, they have the ability to do the thing that they can't do on this occasion. You see what I'm saying? And not only that, but in chapter 6 and verse 13, they've already done it. And so they cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and healed them. And so this dad brings his sick son to them, and I don't know what it looked like. I'm not going to try and read into the text something that I don't know. But you can almost imagine one of these apostles being like, oh yeah, I've done this dozens of times up to this point. Jesus told me I could. We've already done it. And you come up and it's like, whatever the thing is, it doesn't happen. And it's like, wait a minute, why didn't it work that time? It worked last time? What happened this time? So we've got, maybe this is petty to you, but this is one thing that we know about this situation is Jesus gave them this authority. They've had this power. They've had experience with this, and this time it doesn't work. We're just building clues.
I just have a question. But when he says this happens, and then he says faithless generation, do you think the disciples were lacking faith, and that's why it couldn't happen? Do you think the man asking lacked faith, and that's why it couldn't happen? Do you think the surrounding people lacked faith? Do you think it's all of the above? Like, I never really thought about it a whole lot.
Yeah.
I always assumed it was the disciples, but now I'm wondering if it was also the dad, because he does say, if he can, once Jesus gets there. And I don't know if he's now lacking faith because the disciples couldn't do it. I don't know, just things that popped into my head just now.
I was gonna ask Melissa Awad, is she up here? I know she's here today, but teaching class, yeah. I don't know anybody else who has the ESV study Bible, but I wrote it down, so I don't need to ask anybody this, but I thought that same thing. And I went searching for an answer, and I didn't find one that I'm satisfied with, but I will give you this. This is the ESV study Bible. It's just short and simple. The fundamental problem of the people, parenthesis, the opponents, the spiritually oppressed, the 11, and even the disciples, are that they're faithless. And so you have this question, who is faithless? And there's not a solid answer, but most of the resources that I looked at says everybody, you said all of the above. I think, yeah, Jesus looks around at this situation and he's like, where is the faith here? Where is this? Dave and then Kevin.
And that makes sense because he says this faithless generation. It's like he's clumping it all together in this. And if you'll allow me to segue into the thought, I'm looking at the basics here. A man seeking help, the disciples can't give it. Then Jesus questions or makes observation of the faith of this generation, the faithlessness. And then he prays as the teacher. And prayer in and of itself is an act of faith. And it seems like that's what the generation was lacking. It's perhaps in your illustration of the disciples making this miraculous action and it not working, that was the gap there was, okay, now you pray.
Yeah,
And that's where Jesus fits that in.
yeah. So here's what I want to do right now. I want to start a list on the board of things that we've come up with so far in this class. And I'm not going to do it because the first thing on my list is self-sufficiency, and I know good and well that I can't spell that. So I'm not going to write it on the list. So Ryan's point, I think, was it your point? I don't know. So Jay's point. Jay's point was maybe self-sufficiency. Maybe I can do this without Jesus. A lack of prayer, a lack of faith. We're putting things that we know into the basket.
No, I think that very similar kind of concept is under this backdrop of everybody kind of thinking that they're better than everybody else. And it's like, person one chose to do it, they can't do it. Like, you're not doing it right. Let me do it. And then you get this whole like, and putting their faith in themselves, not in God.
Yeah. Yeah. Dustin?
I think there's also, when you do cross-reference in Matthew, of course, my Bible says it here, and Mark as well, that there's a self-sacrificing element that Jesus is also trying to teach, more than just praying. In Matthew, it does say prayer and fasting. So there's this element of not just don't rely solely upon yourself, but rely on God, but then have this extra act of sacrificing a need so that you can, in essence, show God how much faith you put in Him, more than just, I'm going to come to you, I'm going to sacrifice this need to show you I'm coming to you even more passionately.
How serious are you about this? Number 3, when the disciples asked why they could not cast it out, Jesus' response was, we've already said this, but this is where my bullet point is. Jesus' response is, this kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer. I wonder, I think this is a fair assumption, but I can see a door where maybe there's some doubt in this. But I think, can we all be on the same page at this point that when Jesus says this kind can only be cast out with prayer, that at least part of their deficiency is a lack of prayer in this situation? Is that a fair,
It may also be a lack of belief. You know, the more appropriate question for the man would have been, would you choose to do this? Not can you do this? And so there was a simple lack of recognition of who Jesus even was.
Yeah. I think I saw another one over here. Cindy?
When I'm reading through this, their whole focus is not on God. Their whole focus, like Kevin Wise said, is, oh, I can do this, watch, I can do it better than you. And then the whole focus for this man was not on God, it was just heal him. He didn't care how it got done.
Yeah.
He just wanted it done. And then you come over to this last verse, this kind cannot come out by anything but prayer. Why is that? Because you're praying to God who is going to do it if he wants to, if he sees fit.
Yeah, good. So let's do one more thing on this. The fourth thing that I know, Dustin took us to the parallel text. In Matthew's version, in Mark's version, why can't we do this? Jesus says this kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer. In Matthew's version, I'm in Matthew 17, 19, and 20. Matthew 17, 19, and 20. Matthew's version, Jesus, why can't we do this? And Jesus says, because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move and nothing will be impossible for you. And so it seems to me, if you put these things all together, it seems to me that when you combine Mark's gospel with Matthew's gospel and the different aspects of what Jesus is answering, why can't we do this? Because you didn't pray, because of your little faith. It at least puts a little bit extra into the basket for me. So let me start sharing with you some of the things that I ran across. And there's a lot of them. I don't know if I'll make you go through all of them with me, but we can stop to talk about each one of these if you'd like. Apparently they had, I put little numbers here in my notes. What's the problem? Apparently they had, one, taken for granted the power given to them. Oh, hey, I cast out demons before, I'll cast out demons again. It's almost like a rote. I do this thing. That's what I do. I do this thing. And I'll stop here because this is a class on faith. And what I'd like to start doing is translating this conversation into our own selves and our own faith and our own lives. How simple would it be for me to approach anything in my life and say, I've done this 1,000 times before, I'll just do it again. So we're going to start the process of bringing that into the story, into me. Taking for granted, number one, taking for granted the power given to them. Or, number two, they had come to believe that it was inherent in themselves. I have cast out demons before. I will cast out demons again. I have gotten myself out of financial crisis before. I will get myself out again. I have gotten myself out of this dark night of the soul before. I will get myself out again. There's a million different things that we could do as a part of our lives.
I feel like everybody's thinking it, but it just makes me think of just David and how he, nearly every instance, shall I go to war or shall I do this? He's in prayerful mindset to go to God and ask, where he's already established his credibility as a man after God's own heart, and God chooses him for that reason. But then we see history play out that's one of the primary factors that makes him
which is what brought me to this class first of all. You cannot look at the life of Jesus without seeing him constantly in prayer. And so a study of the constant prayer of Jesus and what we learn with that brings me to this one illustration of, well, if we want the kind of faith of Jesus, it seems like it's going to have to start here. Number 3, so they no longer depended prayerfully on God for it. The lack of prayer is obviously a part of this. It's one of the things that we know. And their failure shows their lack of prayer. Here's another. The disciples' problem on this understanding has been a loss of the sense of dependence on Jesus' unique power, which had undergirded their earlier exorcist success. They have become blasé and thought of themselves as now the natural experts in such a case. And they must learn that in spiritual conflict, there is no such automatic power. The thing that they have to learn, there's another one that I want to get to, but I'll just start throwing it out here now. Let's read it. Starts with those. Those who belong to the faithless generation do not cast out evil, God does. The faith in this story is a lack of, I don't want to say a lack of understanding, a lack of remembering where the power comes from, where the motivation and the drive comes from. God is the one who does it, not them. The power belongs entirely to him and must be received anew each time from him through a life of prayer. Now listen to this. This is what I love about this story so much. The prayerful attitude of, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief, that attitude is therefore necessary for the healer, the disciples, as well as for the sufferer. Which is, I think, the genius of Mark. We call this a Mark sandwich. In the Gospel of Mark, you see over and over again a story, a middle story, and that same first story resumed. And they always help inform one another. And so this is a Mark sandwich, and this guy saying, I do believe, help my unbelief, informs the bread of the sandwich. We can't cast out a demon. And Jesus says, this kind only comes out by prayer. You of little faith. Their attitude should have been, help my unbelief. To throw themselves even more deeply into God rather than their alternative, which is to withdraw and bicker among themselves.
I was trying to think of like the opposite example and what it would look like if they were dependent on God. And I thought of Acts chapter 3 where Peter and John heal this lame beggar and they say like, in the name of Jesus, rise up and walk. And this big crowd flocks around him. And then Peter says, men of Israel, why do you wonder at this, or why do you stare at us as though by our own power or piety we made him walk? So like he figures this out a little bit later, like this is nothing from me at all. And then he uses the avenue to teach about God, but he has to get to this point.
Yeah, I love that example too. Peter on this occasion, we can't blame Peter on this occasion. He's coming down with Jesus, but he's watching. And you can see Peter and John both watching, and they're like, I don't want that story to be written about me. So they figure it out on this. But what a perfect, I just want to stay here for a minute. What a perfect illustration of, this is not me, this is God. I'm in trouble right now. I'm not going to rely on me, I'm going to rely on God. Morgan?
I'm just wondering if I've always read this wrong. Like, I always thought he was a good example, the father of humility.
Oh, I think it is a good example.
I'm like taking this the wrong way then. I thought like he was right. He came to God and he asked for compassion and help, so he knows that God can provide that. And like there's a part of his faith that doubts, which I think is kind of the point of the story. Like nobody has perfect faith. Is that what?
I think that's exactly what I think we're supposed to do with this text is see that story of that guy in all of his glorious imperfection and humility and say, you disciples, that's what you need to learn. Help my unbelief. I do believe, help me where I'm lacking, not let's fight about this because we can't get it done.
This is going to sound shocking, but I think God expected this reaction out of the disciples. You look at the apostles start following Jesus around, and he first starts performing miracles, and I mean, their minds are blown. It's just something totally new, like they're not used to doing this. But I'm thinking of the Dunning-Kruger effect, like they're first exposed to this, and they're like, wow, but then they start doing it, and then all of a sudden they're really confident in it. They're like, I can do this, I have power. And then Jesus hits them at this point, and it's like, yeah, it's not you. That's why in Matthew it says it's only possible through faith, and in Mark it says only possible through prayer, because both things are pointing to you get what's happening, but you don't know why. Look deeper. It's God.
Yeah. Good. Mike?
All right, try this.
No disclaimers. Just make your comment.
Try this, see if it makes any sense. It's in Matthew 17, where this is talked about. It always really actually hurts my feelings, what Jesus says. You unbelieving. And then he says, you perverse generation. How long will I have to be with you? And I was kind of thinking about, what was it, last week or the week before, we were looking at Hebrews, and those Christians who were falling away. And this might be where I'm making a misconnection, but it really is disgusting to God when we say, I'm struggling in my faith, but yet there's something that I am unsure about in my business or in my personal life. I'll spend hours, days, weeks, even years working, thinking on the problem. How can I find a solution? How can I make this better? How can we turn this around? But when it comes to something spiritual, it's, oh, I don't know that part of the Bible much. That's really hard. Oh, well. And I wonder why my faith is struggling, because basically when Jesus says the word perverse, it's really shocking to me. It's very offensive to God when he's done all these things and he's shown this masterful 66 books of what will build me up the way I need, but yet I'll spend all my time, on earthly things that are a waste of time. They're gonna fail, but not spend my time. And so, anyways, that might have not been a good connection.
No, I think it's a great connection. And I'm gonna follow that up with going back to Hebrews. I think I've got a couple of these for you. This is the way I want to end. Hebrews 5 and verse 7. I said I want to end here. This is the first place that I want to go to see an example of it. In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. That is one verse that doesn't even begin to do justice to the life of Jesus. If this is what brings me to this study, if Jesus himself, who is the perfect picture of faith and faithfulness, if Jesus himself gets this strength, this faith from a constant interaction of prayer with God, then it seems like there's no way that we can have a quarter-long conversation about faith without throwing prayer into that mix. And I think it probably should be even more than just throwing prayer into that mix. And then this is just the last example, because this is like Dave's comment a minute ago. We're all thinking it. This is what I'm thinking of as I think about Jesus and prayer and faith. This story in Matthew 26, starting in verse 36, Jesus is in the garden, and he prays, and he asks his disciples to pray. He's getting ready to do something, and his response to that, his action to that is not, hey, I need to practice a little more. I need to try a little harder. I need to get myself ready. His response is, we need to pray about this. And the prayer is the fuel that drives the faith that pushes him through. That's the statement for this class. The prayer is the fuel that powers the faith that pushes us through. And so you can read that story if you want in Matthew 26 of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. But I'll just stop it there with, if we're gonna do this quarter and say increase our faith, this has got to be a part of it. If you want more faith, this has got to be a part of it. To go to God more consistently, more deeply, to rely on God more, to ask God more, that's going to be more a part of our faith if we want it. You can have the last remark on that. Oh, lots of last remarks on that. Go ahead, Morgan. You were the first one.
I was just thinking, I was talking with Megan about this, and I think it's because of the humility aspect of it. If we just think of prayer as a conversation with God, you're approaching him, and he's the king. He's on a throne, and I think if you are struggling to believe that he's the king and he is Lord, going and talking to him, even if you just have 1% of faith, it really makes you humble your heart and approach him from like a place of lowliness, and where you are in that relationship, it really sets you straight. I think that's why prayer can be so helpful.
Yeah. Truly to depend and rely on him, which is what these disciples were not doing.
There's just a piece I didn't hear as much spin on, which this kind, like there's a different situation here than what, because we know in Matthew and Mark, apostles were out casting demons, right? So they had been, but there was something unique when it says, but this kind.
Yeah.
And I don't know if maybe I'm bridging too far, but it makes me think like, I don't pick any situation, maybe sports team, right? You got a sports team that's winning every game, and they finally get into the national championship, and they forgot what got them there. And now they're in the championship, and they're very confident because they went undefeated that they're going to win. But they really have forgotten what even got them to that point.
Yeah.
And it's something different. It's a national championship, and something about the situation. I don't know, just that piece about it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's Rocky too.
Right.
Yeah. There's only one picture for what you're describing right now. That's Rocky too. All right. Thanks for your comments this morning. Next time, I do hope to spend at least, it might end up being a sermon about Jesus and prayer, but I do hope to move into saving faith. If we're going to talk about faith, let's talk about the kind of faith, like we've built this foundation. What is faith? Now we're going to talk about saving faith that Jesus points us to. All right, that's next time.